there's anything critical that needs to make it into the temp rules, we'll get in, mainly hoping to use our time today to go over the changes that I have made that are substantive, and just to kind of highlight things from the, I'm not trying to hide anything from the making sure.
Okay.
Thanks, Karen.
Okay, you're ready to go.
Great. All right, welcome everybody. Good afternoon. This is our third Rulemaking Advisory Committee meeting for 2021 Senate Bill 763 relating to the licensure of pharmaceutical sales reps. This is our third meeting, and as I did last time, rather than going through, rather than doing a roll call, I'm just going to run through introductions basically on my end to avoid confusion and crosstalk. We have Brian Von Hoy representing GMM Health, Daria McGrew representing Pharma, Maribeth Garino for Osberg, Chloe Becker for OCAP, and Rick Blackwell for Pacific Source. I am expecting Anne Murray from Bristol Myers Squibb to come on later, but she was unable to make the beginning of the call. So I will share my screen here and pull up our agenda for today. So everybody can see that okay. If it's not coming through, let me know. I've sent around earlier today 2 new drafts, one of which is for our temp rules that we are hoping to have go in effect for the first, for the sort of immediate startup of the program. That is what we primarily discussed last time. And I also sent around a draft of sort of intended permanent rules, which is bringing back a lot of the stuff that I had cut out of the temp rules, just on the basis of, it wasn't stuff that we needed in there immediately, and we're trying to kind of keep that in a form that is only having what we actually need for the beginning. So sort of the plan for today is I'm going to go over the current draft of the temp rules, highlight the things that I have changed in there, go over the draft of the permanent rules, go over the things that have been added or changed in there. We'll have be open for discussion if you feel comfortable. If you have issues that come up that you want to address as I'm going through anything, please pop in. Since I'll be sharing the screen still, I won't be able to see the raised hand. So let's go ahead and speak up if you have anything. And we have a little bit of time reserved for public comment in case anybody comes on. If you are a member of the public who is not an official RAC member, please let Karen know in the chat that you'd be interested in providing some information, and we will get you on the list and provide that. Beyond that, just please remember general Zoom etiquette. Keep yourself muted when you're not talking to avoid noise. And I do encourage people, if they are comfortable, to have video up if that's how you prefer, but you are welcome to be voice only if that is your preference. So I'm going to start off with our temp rules here. So just kind of generally going over the changes that we've made. In the draft that I sent around, I've tried to highlight the substantive changes that I've made. There's less changes to this than there were last month. I think we've kind of nailed down most of the solid material that we're going to do in. And of course, I'm also going to highlight some of the stuff that I didn't change that I asked for feedback on. So with temp rules, the rule numbers I've just removed from this draft since the rules are going to be automatically numbered by the Secretary of State system. Throughout these, I've removed the references to specific rules with these temporary rules, basically, for consistency of how these things are defined. And that's sort of the broad base things. Within the rule text, there's been a number of references made to the director, which came from various things that I pulled from other sections of the ORs. For the most part, I've tried to replace those simply with the department for consistency across the way that we've been doing this in the drug pricing and prescription drug regulation area.
Hey, Numi.
Yeah, go ahead.
Just real quick. I know we discussed this last time, but I just want to kind of revisit. If you go back up to the definition of the sales pharmaceutical representative, and I think it's, it is clear, but I'm also anticipating there'll be a lot of calls to you guys, and it might be better if you can, or you might want to consider, many companies will wonder, does this include my MSLs? Does this include someone that's in market access that's calling on state Medicaid to gain access, but they're not selling, they're trying to get coverage? I don't know if you want to provide clarity, because otherwise you will get a lot of calls.
Well, so I heard feedback on both sides of this issue, certainly in discussion and written submissions as well. Our general thought has been that because of the limitation on marketing or promoting, we don't believe that this language extends to MSLs, and just in the interest of time, I'm not particularly inclined to make a modification to this draft for the temp rules. Given that this issue has kept coming up, I would be open to maybe modifying this a little bit in terms of in the permanent rules, and kind of, do you think it would address the concern to say, rather than kind of putting the text in here, would be to add a definition for markets or promotes that is excluding the sort of MSL activities that we're not really looking to get at, which is
MSLs, or even folks that are, they're not calling, they probably wouldn't hit the 15 days anyway, but they're making market access stuff.
Okay. I will think about that and take that back, and I will look at putting out a modified draft of the permanent rules that does take that into account and adds that definition. Any other thoughts related to that? Okay, just give me 1 sec to take down a note on that.
Sorry, Numi, while you're doing that, I'm just fumbling with my mute here. Yeah, reiterating that was the main comment in our comment letter on this of the 2 comments, is just requesting clarity there. As was mentioned before, in Chicago, they felt it was important enough to clarify. We think that it will just cut down on a lot of questions and make more consistent reporting, make it consistent among member companies, and seek clarity here. Thanks.
Yeah, no, that is, I appreciate the concern and recognize it's important, and we certainly don't want to do anything that's should be perceived as going farther than what our mandate to do is with this program. And it is not our intent to capture medical science liaisons as they were described in previous meetings, since I have some better understanding of what that means from your input. It's not our intent to capture them. My belief had been that marketing or promoting is not really something that covers those activities, but kind of given that the concern's still there, I think having a definition that is kind of talking about those activities rather than kind of looking at the pharmaceutical representative definition itself is the approach that I'm going to take. So I will hope to circulate a permanent draft with that change well before we would plan to file that, which like I don't have a clear timeline on the permanent rules yet, but that's I will circulate that in the next draft and try and get that around with time for people to give feedback on that change.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Okay. So I'm going to note, if moving on just quickly, if there's interest in revisiting that, I'm happy to keep discussing if there's non-duplicative thoughts. So I've asked for feedback about the amount of continuing education. And kind of, we had initially, my initial draft had set it at 10 hours pre-licensure, 5 hours post-licensure for continuing education. And heard some feedback suggesting that we should be going down to 5 hours, so it's the same amount for both posts. Got some feedback from proponents of the bill that was pointing out that a lot of our other licensing programs have larger requirements. The insurance producer license, for example, which is insurance agents as an example, requires 20 hours pre-licensure and then 10 hours annual continuing education. I believe I have these numbers right, but it is 20 hours pre-licensure. And feedback I got from the program team that will be actually implementing this is that generally we require more pre-licensure education than continuing education. So kind of keeping and consistent with that, I elected not to make a change to that requirement, but we're still going to be looking at 10 hours pre-licensure, 5 hours continuing education annually. Again, as we discussed last time, we're pretty much just accepting anything that Chicago or other jurisdictions are accepting for the first year as being something that will fit in for this and that will have the more complex education, certification requirements, reporting requirements, et cetera, in place for the long term. And I did get some comments back that indicated that right now Chicago recognizes something like 200 credit hours are available as courses that a pharmaceutical sales rep could take to satisfy their requirement. We think that's more than adequate for somebody, since we're not requiring specific stuff for the first year, just kind of in the general subject matter that more or less lines up with what Chicago is asking for. We would expect that people would be able to find 15 hours of classes that they can take in the appropriate subjects before they apply for a renewal. And so again, just a reminder, we're not asking for actual pre-licensure education at this point. We're kind of asking you to make that up over the course of the first year of licensure. You know, we're starting from zero on January 1st and not having time to set up the full sort of certification system. That's what we've landed on. Just kind of some changes that I made to the language here, since this is addressing really only 2022, I changed language here as highlighted to what we're accepting as qualified education for the purpose of pre-licensure education and continuing education is the reciprocity language that I introduced last time. The one caveat that we're asking education providers to be registered with NIPR so that we can track it within our system. And then the additional language that was added, we will not accept credits that are provided by a licensee's employer, and that is in the statute, so I cannot change that.
Can I ask a question about B above? I know that some in Chicago, when you go look at what they accept, a lot of that is, many of them were offered by the FDA or CDC. Are they registered? I'm not familiar with the NIPR. Are they cross-registered, or is CDC and FDA going to say, we're not registering with some new agency for you?
That is a tricky question. Haven, do you have any insight that you could give onto that? Or like maybe there's something we could do in recognizing those credits without going through NIPR specifically for that sort of type of provider?
Yeah, so in the permanent rules, at least on the insurance producer side, which is where we're going to get some of that language from, there's the ability to request credits that aren't approved by a provider that's registered with an NIPR. So it would be, kind of I forget what the term is, but it's basically a unapproved credit that we then request reapproval, like a more manual process. So maybe we just need to make that language a little more, either provide an exception to it for government agencies, or just think about the wording around that, because I do see, like, if it's the FDA, they're probably not going to want to go through that process, but that doesn't mean we wouldn't accept the credits. It's just a different process that we would be accepting those credits.
Yeah, I think particularly in the first year when you're trying to push people towards what Chicago accepts, then would be nice to clarify that. Thank you.
I mean, could you just amend, what is that, that subsection or that paragraph A, just to, note that a class issued by a state or federal or local jurisdiction, just to make sure you capture that there may be classes approved by the feds?
Yeah, I think in consideration of that, I will modify the text of this subsection to basically say either it must be provided by an entity registered as an education provider, or provided by a government entity such as a state or federal entity such as the CDC or the FDA. And I will pull some of the language from the permanent rule that's related to proof and throw it in here as well, just in terms of documentation of a credit. So I will try and get that done. Send that around to the group. It's like my general hope has been to kind of get things. So with the timeline on these temp rules, my hope has been to get them filed in mid-December. And since there's a temporary rule, it's effective as of the time of filing. But in order to make that happen, you have to go through internal review processes on our end. So kind of my hope had been to more or less finalize the language that comes off of my desk today. But kind of recognizing that this is a little bit of a sticky wicket in terms of looking at the NAPR requirement, looking at the way that Chicago has done things and whether or not federal agencies would be willing to meet that requirement if they haven't already done so for some other purpose. I'll throw together some language to try and address that concern and circulate it after our call today before my next meeting. So if I do that, yeah.
My name's John Watson. I just have a quick question. So you're tracking education and licensing for this through an insurance organization. Do you do the same thing with your doctors?
I'm sorry, do you represent a particular group or?
I'm a pharmaceutical rep, and I looked at the Chicago website today. This may affect me down the road, but I'm just wondering, having sold insurance in the past, now I'm a pharmaceutical rep. I'm assuming you do a different tracking for your doctors than you do for what you're proposing here.
I appreciate your concern. Was it Mr. Watson? Was it
Watson.
Right? Watson. I apologize. But in general, like I'm going to try and restrict the general conversation to people who are officially members of the RAC. And we do have some time reserved for public comment, which people should feel free to raise concerns like this. That said, since you have spoken up at this point, I will try and address that. We are using a system for this that the legislature elected to put this program within the Division of Insurance. We are using the tools that we have and to try and keep things consistent with our existing programs, we are using technology solutions that already exist within our programs. So this relates to insurance producers, that there are a number of drug pricing and prescription drug related programs that have been implemented with the Division of Insurance, the Drug Price Transparency Program being one. This is kind of another one that has been put into it. And yeah, you know, ultimately we do not regulate providers, providers to say doctors or nurses or medical providers or anything like that. We primarily regulate insurance, and the legislature in its infinite wisdom has elected to have us also regulate pharmaceutical sales reps and pharmaceutical companies to some extent. So we are using the tools that we have, and so I know that it probably sounds a little bit odd, but this is the technology solution we have available. Haven, do we have any, I mean, just in terms of looking at what we use SBS for, are there other sort of non-insurance related license types that we collect through that, or is this kind of a new thing for us, just for context?
I believe the pharmacy benefits managers go through that, and I believe that's the only non-insurance producer one. So it is a little novel, but not completely unheard of.
Okay, well, hopefully that answers the concern. We do have time reserved for public comment, so if you have thoughts or questions or other concerns that you would like to raise, I'd encourage you to bring them up during that period of time. But in the meantime, I'd like to avoid further diversions from non-RAC members. And if there are people who are taking us too far off course, I'll have you removed from the call. Anyway, let's see, where were we? So I will work to try and address that concern related to the classes offered by federal entities and have that circulated today. Other changes that I have made. So one thing that I have actually removed from the rule, and this is something that was suggested, was the renewal application. So this is highlighted up here, and that's highlighted because I've removed the terms within 30 days of expiration from the end of that. And basically the kind of thought of this is just based on the timing and the nature of this license, since somebody may not be aware that they need to renew immediately, that the requirement for renewal is you still held a valid and unrevoked license at the end of the preceding year, rather than saying you have to submit this within 30 days of expiration or any other arbitrary timeline. If there is not a submission received prior to that, you know, presumably it will go inactive. And if somebody's only going to do their 15-day sales trip in December of the following year, then they could still apply for relicensure at that point in time. But I'm assuming that would be a rare circumstance. So that is one thing that I have changed in response to comments. Let's see, other things. I believe there's only one other substantive change that I've made in this document, which is related to reporting requirements under the sort of potential for conduct that could result in a suspension, revocation, or civil penalty. And so this reference had a rule reference in it. Since we're not going to have the final rule numbers here, I've swapped it out to just referring to the relevant section of the bill as engrossed. It's 2021 Oregon Laws, Chapter 593, Section 1, Sub 6, which is required reporting. As I'll get to when we're talking about this with the draft permanent rules, we're planning to have the sort of periodic reporting be annual rather than quarterly, as was in my original draft. That is in response to feedback from a lot of the committee members. And because of that, one of the things, well, one of the other things that is in the statute that is in addition to requiring periodic reporting by rule, the director can also ask for reporting at any time. Our hope has been to kind of test our system for collecting these reports by having a director's request go out to a few people, hopefully some pharmaceutical reps who we've developed relationships with and who would like to help the program be successful, be able to send some requests out them and kind of respond back as part of our testing things out before this becomes a regular requirement in the permanent rules.
Yeah, and
That is,
yeah,
go ahead.
real quick on that, Numi. I think that with the permanent rules, you've actually defined, you know, was there in the statute of what things could be reported. That won't be in this temporary rule, correct?
Yes.
And the other part that I'm still trying to wrap my head around is, I know that your jurisdiction is on the licensee, the actual representatives, not the company. So I'm still trying to figure out, you know, the representatives will not report this themselves. I don't know if there's going to be some delegation. It's the companies that will do the reporting through a compliance or a legal review of some type.
Yes, I remember that concern being raised previously, and that change did not make it into my current draft for the permanent rules. So I will plan to add something to that as well before I circulate that draft again. Basically allowing for delegation or for submission of reports on behalf of a licensee, et cetera, in some way. So I will try and address that in the next draft for the permanent rules, which still needs work. Yes, so I will try and address that in the permanent rules before we get down to something that we're actually going to be filing as a PRM. But thanks for that. I've really appreciated all of your comments, Brian. They've been very, very helpful. Any other questions, thoughts, concerns related to the draft temporary rules or any of the items that I've brought up in the current draft?
Numi, this is Rick Blackwell. I haven't had a ton of time with the draft, so I apologize. But I did notice in, I guess it would be rule number 4, in section 6, there's a reference back to section 6 of this rule. And I think you meant 5, but I'm not certain. I just wanted to flag that for you.
Appreciate it. That is what I meant.
Okay. Most of any feedback I have is probably pretty nitpicky and probably doesn't need to be part of this conversation. So
no worries. It's helpful for me. Okay, that is helpful. And no worries about not having a ton of time. I did not give you all a ton of time to look at this before the meeting. So I completely understand and will be accepting written comments afterwards as well. Any other thoughts, questions, concerns on the temp rules or the changes I've discussed here?
Yes, Numi, Daria here. Question: could you speak to where the list of types of courses came from under educational requirements? The coursework may include, and then there's quite an extensive list. And that list goes beyond what was in the statute. And I was just wondering where this language came from. Are there specific courses that the state had in mind? Because some of these are not courses that are generally offered, even like in Chicago.
Yeah.
So this list, for the most part, came straight from the regulations in Chicago. So that is where I pulled the original draft, since it's, it's inclusive in terms of that nobody needs to take all of these classes. It's where we're not expecting that. It's kind of, this is laying out the subject matter that we would view as being acceptable in terms of things.
Yeah, I mean,
in terms of what people are looking for. And kind of beyond that, there are some provisions in the permanent rules that allow for people to submit for credit for classes that they've taken, even if they don't meet these subject matter requirements. And a sort of general process for saying, well, I think this should qualify because it's advancing my professional knowledge.
yeah, and for example, just from the nitpicky stuff, you got one in there twice. The comparative effective claims, I think it's C, and they got it down there in J. The,
Well, it's cost effectiveness.
oh, comparative of cost, you are right. Okay. They aren't the same.
They're slight-
Yeah, the one thing on that, though, comparative effectiveness of pharmaceutical products, I don't know if there's going to be a whole lot out there. Unless you have head-to-head clinical trials, you can't do that. You know, it's so, and it's also, are you talking your products, right? So this is only the products you're promoting.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's out there. If people, yeah, I mean, certainly it's kind of, I think this provision is intended to get at clinical effectiveness.
Yeah. And these are not, this, like you said, this is examples. You don't have to have all of them.
Right.
You have to have one. Is that what it said above, I think?
Yep. One or more of, yes. Yes, that is, yes. Other thoughts, questions, concerns? All right.
Actually, Numi, that does raise a question for me. I'm just asking for clarification purposes is all. So the statute talks about you've got to have ethics, pharmacology, laws and rules, and any other subjects. Are these the any other subjects in the statute then? Or do they all blend together?
I mean, conceivably, I think so. I'd have to go back and look at the specific statutory language. I think, as I remember, the statute has some definitions about the continuing or about the initial education requirement, and then it's kind of more undefined for the continuing education. Or am I flipping that?
Yeah, I think I'm looking at CE. All right. All right. Never mind. All right. I think we're fine.
Okay. All right. Well, so I will give you all time still to look at this and give me feedback on this. I will try and circulate something today that addresses the issue related to continuing education classes offered by government entities. And we'll try and get that today. But in the meantime, I'd like to go ahead and go over the changes that I've made in the draft permanent rule.
Numi, just really briefly on the temporary rules.
Yeah.
Is there any specific timeline where you'd want additional feedback back by? I know we're obviously on a time crunch, but just want to be clear about what your hope for that would be if we have anything else to flag.
Let's say this Friday.
Okay.
That I will get that additional language to you today.
Perfect.
And if you have anything else, any other burning desires that you want to get in on the temp rules, please get them to me by Friday. And I will, let's say, close the business Friday, and then we'll be kind of kicking it to internal review next week so that I can try and get this filed by mid-December so that we can have rules in effect when the program is actually operating. So let me just take note of that. Okay. Thank you for asking for that clarification. So I'm going to do basically the same thing, permanent rules, or I will try and run down through the things that I have changed in that. Again, I've tried to highlight the things that are substantive changes that I've made. I'm not trying to hide anything. I'm trying to make sure that you know where I've made modifications. With the exception of like really big things like having entire blocks of text added in. The big change is rule numbers. This is where we are aiming to actually put this in. The ORS is 600 series within regulatory programs. This immediately follows the rules related to drug price transparency. So with the sort of initial batch that I've got put together, this is going to be running from 836-200-0600 through 836-200-0670. Kind of general changes. Again, I've removed the 30 days before expiration from renewal application. The intent that we're kind of looking at right now is you may apply for renewal as long as you had a valid and unexpired license at the end of the previous year. And so the people that we would be asking to basically apply for a new license is if you've gone through the entire year without applying. So if you've gone entire year without being licensed in Oregon, the following year you would need to apply for a new license after that. Let's see. I've added, let's see, this is just kind of a minor change in wording that is related to renewal. That previously this language was duplicating the language from the initial application, which is something like has completed the course of education described in this rule. And I've changed this, at least 5 hours of continuing education as described in the rule reference here. And one other thing that I've added here is I've renumbered sub E and added this provision here, which is basically related to the part of what we're going to be expecting for people who are applying for renewal is that they've actually complied with the periodic reporting requirement, which I'll get into in a little bit more detail and timing of that, et cetera. So actually, I'm gonna come back to this in a second. Again, I've replaced the term director with department throughout the document for consistency. But the other thing that I wanted to address, and another thing is I've changed the order of the way that this is presented from my original draft. So that it's running the sort of license required, application terms, reporting requirements, which I'll get back to in a second, prohibited conduct, and then civil penalties, and done all of the CLE stuff down at the bottom, since there's a whole lot of that, just to kind of have consistency through there. So that is 635 through 670, I believe is the highest number. So that's one change. I think the thing that there has been a lot of interest in has been related to the reporting requirements, and this is one of the bigger changes. So we talked about this in our first meeting, and people seemed okay with moving from the quarterly reporting requirement I had initially proposed and modeled off of lobbyist registration and reporting requirements, and have changed that to be an annual reporting requirement. So we are looking at basically requiring the reports on April 1st of each year. And so that would start 2023 after there has been an entire year of licensure. And then pretty much the rest of this is all the same as it was before. This is basically the same things that are listed in the statute, except that I've specified the time frame as preceding calendar year. So we're asking for the information that is specified in the statute, list of healthcare providers, number of times of contact. I remember now that I've said I was going to change this to estimated duration of contact, which I didn't get in here since I was focused on the temporal. I apologize for that. And then gifts and other compensation, which I believe is generally prohibited. But this is another change I will make to that. So that is the sort of general what we're looking at for the periodic reporting requirements. We're asking for this once a year, due by April 1st.
Yeah, and I know we have time, Numi, to follow up more on the permanent, and I think that we've discussed this before, and I appreciate you considering putting in the estimate on the duration. And there's a couple things, one, is it for duration for each HCP, or is it an overall duration for all calls over 1 year? So that's because it's going to be a complete estimate guess, because there is no system. You're going to have many interactions that are 30 seconds or less. You'll have interactions that are 5 minutes. You'll have a very few that may be 10 minutes. And it's all going to be a complete estimate, because there is no, so I don't know if you want an estimate for every HCP, which will be really difficult, and every interaction, or is it just, can I give an overall estimate of this is how much time we estimate is average for the HCPs in Oregon from this company? You see what I'm saying? So that's one point. And the other point being, I believe they said this would not be public, and we talked about the monetary value of samples, and federal law says they have no value. We have to label them as free. We can't put a value on them. Not sure, how that'll be worked out. Maybe maybe this is too early to discuss that in the permanent rule.
Yeah, I do remember that. And I did change that in a draft that it looks like I lost the change because I ended up removing all of the reporting stuff in order to kind of present the draft for the draft for the temp rules first in our last meeting. So kind of the intent that I was working with on that is, rather than saying the monetary value of the samples, was going to say the quantity or volume of the samples, which is a suggestion that I believe came from OCAP and Pacific Source. So that is kind of the direction that I was looking to go. So I've taken a note that looks like I've lost a lot of the changes that I intended to make to this section in there. So that is going for estimated duration of contact, and then going for replacing monetary value, instead talking about volume or quantity. So we're going to stuff that can be legally reported. One kind of concern that I have in kind of looking at the concern that you've raised about duration, whether we're looking at duration of contact with each HCP, which, as I do recognize, would be potentially difficult to get together, or kind of collective, which also seems like maybe it would be difficult unless you're just pulling your timesheet for the year. I want to take a look at the actual statutory language to see if I have any flexibility on that, but I'd be interested, Chloe or Maribeth or Rick, if you have any thoughts on whether you'd have that flexibility. Go ahead.
Numi, this is Haven. Do you mind if I jump in for a second?
Yeah, no problem.
So we're in the process of creating this because obviously, even though the report won't be due for a little bit, we need to make sure that we are providing the information that we're going to be collecting, right? So you can start collecting now, even if we don't collect it for a year from now. And we are modeling this somewhat after Chicago, and based on what we're looking at is that it would be that you would be required to put the date of the interaction along with the duration. So if you met with the same doctor 5 times in one day, you could make that one line, one transaction, right? But if you met with that same doctor for, every Monday for 3 weeks, those would each be separate interactions.
Yeah, and I think that the point being, it's, giving the date and the interaction, that's no issue. That's currently collected. Time is not collected in any system. And in order for that, and I think Chicago recognized that as well, and I thought they removed that, or they just don't enforce it, because there is absolutely no system, and we don't want representatives doing things outside of the official, the system that's used to document interactions, because that's how we report. In order to get a system created, it would take a lot of time and a lot of money. to be able to do that. It's not feasible.
Yeah, I know when I was looking at Chicago's, it actually, I thought it had a drop down of the interaction was less than 15 minutes, 15 to 30 minutes, 30 minutes to 2 hours, 2 hours to 8 hours, 8 to 24 hours. So that is what Chicago is requesting. Not saying that that would be exactly what we would be requesting, but
Yeah, the other difference with Chicago, I believe, is they only request, this is only going to be if they request the information, and it's also only if you promote controlled drugs.
Mm.
It's not for all drugs.
good to know.
Yeah, so, I mean, I'm
New me.
just, yeah, go ahead.
Oh, there you go. I was just about to say, it does look like that the state law is looking for the duration. I mean, I guess maybe duration is a term that that the department can figure out what that means. If it's something, well, no, I mean, if it's something like the Chicago approach or if it's something different, but I mean, there's got to be some, I guess, temporal measurement that needs to be reported.
Yeah, I think kind of what Haven was describing with Chicago is probably the most realistic approach, just simply because like I feel I like appreciate the sort of suggestion, Brian, that we could look at, you know, trying to require aggregate time of contacts, but I feel that I'm constrained by the actual statutory language here that it is a per provider, basically per visit sort of structure, and wouldn't be able to kind of do that. So I think what we're going to go with is like, I'm going to change it to estimated and not specify it further than that. Well, Haven, do you know if we're ending up like doing a drop down for that, or are we going to end up having basically a text field that somebody can enter?
I believe we're still discussing that with IT as to what the possibility is. I don't think we've come to 100% resolution on that.
Okay. As I'm kind of thinking, if it's a drop down, then it's kind of fairly self-explanatory and doesn't need to be put in the rule in any way. But if it's a text box and we were saying estimated is to the nearest 5 minutes to the nearest 15 minutes, then that's.
Yeah, and I think that would be, you know, I just want to make sure you're clear that the sales reps do not have the technology to do that. So they're not going to be doing it in real time throughout the year. At the end of the year, maybe it comes back and the company would go, okay, what's our best guess? Is it under 15 minutes? Is it 20? Is it, but it's going to be a guess. So you're just going to get, you know, some general, that's what's going to happen. So I'm not real sure what the purpose of the requirement is and what usefulness it'll have. And like I said, Chicago was strictly only, it was only for controlled drugs. So it is, and only upon request, which is different than your law. Yours is required reporting all drugs. So the technology is just not there. When you limit it to controlled, it's a much smaller and it can be maybe more manual.
Yeah, I appreciate that. So I think we will be looking at something that is just saying estimated, and I don't think at this point in time, I should be involved in the conversations with our IT department in terms of working on what this is going to like. And I think we do have some folks from IT listening in as well, so they'll have kind of perspective on where this is coming from. My sort of initial inclination is that I'll change it to estimated duration rather than asking for specific duration. It sounds like that won't be available. And we'll look to see the technology solution, either doing that through Dropdown where it's relatively self-explanatory, or potentially we'll issue some additional guidance, whether through a bulletin or some other form that's kind of specifying if it's a text box, what we're looking for in terms of how precise an estimation would be. And since it sounds like that's going to be going to compliance departments rather than individual PSRs, like, I think that's should be acceptable. Let's see. Any additional thoughts, questions on the reporting requirements? Okay. So kind of moving back up here. So the text that I mentioned that I had added up here. So we're starting to require the annual reports from April 1st of each year. So we're referring back to the preceding calendar year. So the first reports will be due April 1st, 2023. Have all the information discussed in the subsection and the rule that we just were looking at. And I added this in here because this is one of the things that in our discussions we've looked at. What would be the considerations for somebody applying for renewal? One of those is, have they actually fulfilled this reporting requirement? So I threw in this new term here. I just drafted this today, so I don't necessarily think it's perfect. But basically for applications for renewal that are submitted before April 1st, 2023, none of these reports will have come in. So we're not going to be asking for basically first year renewals to be providing this. But so what we will be doing for applications for renewal that are submitted after that date, we'll be looking for documentation that shows that they have submitted the information that's required under the reporting requirement. And kind of what I had been thinking with that is that they'll be able to submit something that is generated by the IREG system, so where we're going to be collecting these reports, or we'll just be able to verify with a receipt number or something along those lines to say, okay, here's my proof that I've submitted this information as required before I ask for renewal. Or for people kind of keeping open the possibility that somebody doesn't apply for relicensure for a license renewal for the beginning of the year, if they wait until, again, the hypothetical December, that you're going to go on your sales trip from December 15th to December 31st to Oregon, that you would be able to submit this information at that point in time if you're asking for renewal then. So I'm not entirely positive that this language kind of addresses that concern. As I said, I drafted it today, so I may tweak it a little bit more to try and get that in the final version of the permanent rules we'll be putting forward. But that's kind of the intent of that. Any questions, thoughts, concerns related to this?
And we're still, this is Haven again, and we're still working on this, but I don't think they'll actually have to manually provide us the information. I think we'll be able to link up the systems, but we're still working on that. So we would know ahead of time when they apply whether or not this has been submitted, but that's to be seen.
Okay, that's helpful. I will leave it for now.
And I guess kind of tying to that with technology and systems, and I certainly appreciate that you're trying to use what's existing. If a company, as we said, compliance or legal, it won't be coming from the sales reps, but they'll look at it, they'll make sure all the data is there, they'll make sure it's clean, they're going to submit it on behalf of that sales rep. Would the company be able to submit for, say you have multiple reps in the state? Is it like one report that would go that has all of them, or does it separate reporting? I guess that depends on how your system would be linked. And you see what I'm asking?
Yeah, Brian. And we are looking at ways that maybe the licensed PSR would have a login, but they would be able to authorize an authorized user to log into a company account, and then multiple PSRs would be linked to that company. We're still working on what the details would look like, but we are taking that into consideration, and there would be a way for the information, if we can do it the way we want, the company could upload information for multiple PSRs, and all of that would link to their information in SBS saying that it's there. And it's not, that information wouldn't be housed into the SBS or NIPR side of the house. It would just be able to say, yes, the information has been uploaded, not whether or not it's correct or anything.
Thank you.
Other thoughts, questions, concerns?
Not on that in particular, Numi, but when I get the green light, I have another issue.
Okay. Let me see. Okay, there's one other change that I want to mention, and then I'll kind of go to open agenda on the permanent draft. So the one thing that I'll mention, and I've tried to catch this everywhere, has been in all of these, so all these rules that are related to continuing education. So starting from 635. These are taken from our producer licensing rules in the ORs. There was a concern raised with the term provider, which is used in the draft, which is used in the rules that I pulled this from. And the concern was raised last time we discussed these sections that the term provider is confusing in this instance as referring to education providers, since it is since the other definitions and sort of the thing, these rules in particular are describing a class of individual who have relationships with healthcare providers, and we don't want to confuse with education providers. So throughout these sections of the rules, I have replaced the term provider with education provider, which I'm sure that I can find an example of somewhere, but that is, or not, a provider of continuing education, an education provider. So that is, it's possible that I've missed a few, but I will be going through these and making sure that that's done. And hopefully that addresses the possibility of confusion. So that is the other change that I've made in these drafts. Okay. So are there other thoughts, questions, concerns related to the draft as a whole, or specific items that I didn't bring up today?
Numi, Ann again, and I joined due to a flight delay. I joined about 20 minutes late. So if you guys did talk about this, then just flag it and I can follow up with you in person or offline. But specifically related to the confidentiality of the information that you'll be collecting, can you specify for us what your intent is currently with regard to what information would be available to the public or interested parties and what information would not? I'm still not very clear on the two separate categories and would like to get additional clarification.
Well, so Haven can probably put some light on at least the basics that we're planning to have public. Haven? I believe we were planning to, go ahead.
Oh, go ahead, Numi.
I believe we were planning to have public basically the non-personal information, so beyond name.
Okay.
But we weren't looking, so like basically name, business name if applicable, business address, and business telephone. So we're not going to be listing personal telephone, personal email, those sorts of things. So those would be things that we retain, that we collect that information, social security number, for purposes of our compliance with state and other state and federal law, and also for the sort of personal contact information we keep so that we can be in contact with the licensee to address issues that come up related to the licensure. So we're not looking to publish any of these other things. I don't believe the statute gives us specific direction in what we're doing with the rest of the information that we're collecting here. So any of these things that are kind of in these annual reports, that there is no specific information that is given related to, we're not directed to do a report to the legislature. We're not directed to do research into this information and report it out. It's kind of just all of the number of contacts, location, duration, pharmaceutical products provided,
So-
et cetera, et cetera.
I-
Yeah, go ahead.
And I think there's a couple of concerns that when I raise it, because we talked about a few of these, but one being the location of, let's say, controlled substance samples that have been, provided to a particular provider, having that, billboard up there for anybody to see is of significant concern. And then the actual contact between the provider and the sales representative, the name, and again, I guess it's the same thing, the name and the location of where that contact took place, that will all be public information and is what you're intending?
I don't have a specific intent at this point.
Yeah, the other thing to add on to that I was thinking of, and certainly personal safety is huge. And, or we don't want to leave anyone, the public, to know where dangerous drugs are. And we also, I appreciate the non-personal information will only be there. But the other concern, though, is from a marketing perspective and targeting perspective, companies don't, you don't want to show your competitors who you call on. And that's not something from a public perspective. There's other reasons why you wouldn't want that information to be public from a competition perspective.
Do you want me to jump in here, DFR, since I used to have to do the records request for you?
That would be great, Rick. And I do have some information about the licensing that we can come back to.
Yeah, so I mean, if there's claims of trade secrets, right? So typically what happens is DFR will, typical situation is DFR will contact the holder of the information, say they've got a records request, and the burden's usually on the holder of the trade secret to show kind of line by line, this information's protected, as because only a few people know it, it's got commercial advantage, that sort of thing. In terms of information that someone might not reasonably be expected to release, like their home address, that would usually is just redacted and not disclosed even in a records request. So that's my understanding of how this information be treated. Now, again, I've been gone for a couple of years, so your results may vary, but that's kind of what the public record standards are.
Yeah, thank you, Rick. This is Haven. So sorry, I was a little confused by the question. So I see this as two separate things. There's the information that's required for the licensing, and anyone, you can Google Oregon Insurance Producer Lookup, and it will take you to our site where you can look up any insurance producer. Because we are using SBS and NIPR as the database to house this, you will also be able to look up pharmaceutical sales reps. The reason I direct you to that is because you can see the information that the public will have access to. And it is all the business information, not a personal cell phone, unless someone puts their personal cell phone in as their business phone number. No information that is personal gets identified if a provider were to look up a pharmaceutical sales rep, or anyone for that matter. And like I said, you can look up that information. I just did Smith with the first letter J and came up with a bunch, and you can click on it and it gives you the information. So that will give you an idea of what is on the NIPR licensing side. That information we do not have the ability to change. And then the second part is the reporting, right? And so we collect annual reports for basically all of our license types and registrations that we require through DFR. That information, unless it's requested, like Rick says, isn't public information. And typically what we would use that information for is to look for trends, to provide information to more of a cumulative information, not here's per line the data that we have, but these are the averages, or this is the drug type, and this is how many times it has been spoke to by PSRs to providers. So it's not really about the minute data, it's about the cumulative information that is collected, is typically what we use the annual reports for.
So hopefully that answers the question in, and glad you were able to make it. Is
Yeah,
that,
thank you. And yeah, and I think, you know, the concern obviously is safety, as well as the confidentiality of the information. So I do appreciate, Haven, the discussion of the two different buckets, if you will. I'll be very frank that, you know, prompted by the Secretary of State's audit, I'm, you know, just concerned that we make sure that, in fact, all this information is actually going to be preserved as confidential, and just laying on the table the fact that certainly the state auditor's report leads to additional concerns with regard to the ability to maintain confidentiality of the information.
all right. Appreciate that. And,
So to the extent that you're able to address that, not now necessarily, obviously, but just in terms of what the department is doing in that regard, I think it would go a long way to ease the concerns with regard to the type of information that you're going to be handling. Thanks.
yeah, no, appreciate that concern, and it was not something that had been raised by anyone else, so no worries on that. I've got the floor generally open. So other general thoughts, questions, or concerns on items we have not discussed as of yet.
Numi, just a note. I don't know if you, oh, you got it. Your email is
go.
still showing.
Whoops. My bad.
Similarly to my question on the temporary rules, obviously wanting to review these permanent rules more closely than I've had to in the last little bit here today. And, you know, check with my folks. What is kind of your timeline for us providing any other feedback on these permanent rules? And if you're going to get to that at the end of this, feel free to wait, but just kind of curious on kind of what your feedback timeline is.
Yeah, so I will get to that at the end and sort of talking about next steps. This was something in this meeting too, that I do have a plan for addressing. So
Great, we can cover it then.
Okay. Any thoughts, questions, concerns about the substantive content of the drafts currently?
Just
Yeah,
reserving the right to comment on the permanent. We've seen most of the temporary one now. Appreciate the continued tweaks. Permanent one, we'll definitely want to take a deeper look at it and submit official comments moving forward. Thanks. Of
course. It's like I am in no way presenting this draft with the assumption this is what I'm going to file. It's a big program to stand up. I'm doing most of the work, so well, I'm doing most of the work on the policy side. IT is doing licensing. It's probably more than I'm doing for it, honestly. So 2:45. Karen, have we gotten anybody interested in public comment?
Yes, we have John Wasson,
All right,
who
John.
requested.
Okay, John, if
So-
you
So
have
I
anything to
unmuted.
add, the floor is yours.
I unmuted. Thank you very much. The one concern, being a current pharmaceutical rep, about cell phones, most of us only have personal cell phone numbers. We are not provided with company cell phones. So now you're saying that that would be public information. That wasn't my original comment, but my original comment has to do with, I went online and looked at various licenses in the state of Oregon. And I honestly, the cynic in me sees this as a money grab, because this license is only good for a year, whereas a medical license is good for 2 years, and their renewal is only $560. So I'm just a little frustrated because to me, this is obviously a law that I'm not represented because I live in another state and happen to cross the border occasionally to call on clients. So it's the classic, no representation, but I'm affected. So I just want to voice that opinion of this whole law, not this group, but the state legislature putting this in place as a blatant money grab.
Thanks, John, for your concern. I certainly, appreciate you coming forward with that. I mean, unfortunately, for better or worse, both of the things that you've raised, both the duration of the license and the size of the fee, are things that are written into the statute, and we didn't have the flexibility to adjust by rule. So if there are considerations, I mean, legislature in its infinite wisdom has created the program under these provisions, and we are implementing the law that we have, for better or worse. Karen, did we have anyone else sign up for expressing interest in public comment?
Nope.
All right. Also, I'm going to kind of quickly go over thoughts for next steps, and then we can, if there's anything else anybody would like to address at that point, discussion, burning thoughts that have occurred to you at the last moment. I mean, we should have a couple minutes. So next steps. I'm looking to file the temporary rule mid-December, as I said. I will circulate that additional language related to continuing education provided by government entities this afternoon. And I would like to see any feedback that people have on the rule as a whole or on that particular new language that I'm going to circulate today by the close of business on Friday, since I'm going to be looking to get that moving so that I can get this filed in mid-December and have a rule in effect by January 1. So that is what we're looking at for the temp rule. So I'll circulate that modification today. Comments on both the whole thing as well as that change, please get them to me by close of business Friday. And then on the permanent rules. So we are not under a huge time crunch to get this done, although I wouldn't necessarily want to keep y'all in RAC meetings for the next year. I wanted to ask if there was interest in doing any additional in-person meetings via Teams to discuss the permanent rule draft after I put some of those additional edits in, or if people would be comfortable just doing written feedback on the draft from this point forward. Any so general poll of the group, would you like to continue doing these calls, or would you be satisfied with just written feedback?
So Numi, you've got till, if you file December 15th, you got till about May 16th, right? About 6 months for the temp rules to be in effect.
Yes.
They'll expire 180 days after filing.
Yeah, correct.
Yeah. And so then you've got 49 days from working back from May, right, to get the permanent rules filed, because that's that legislator notice. So we're going to probably need to talk at least once, don't you think, before the permanent rules are filed, or get to the point where you need to file permanently?
Yes.
Okay.
I mean, I appreciate the discussion and the ability to bounce things off and to be able to hear what, your perspective as well. So I vote for at least another in person, or whatever we're calling this, Teams meeting, for the permanence.
I agree.
All right. Well, that sounds like there is interest in having a let's call it a live discussion. So Karen, can you try and get us something on the calendar for January?
Yeah, definitely
Not in
January.
session.
Correct, before session.
So like I have other stuff that I need to be working on in December that will prevent me from putting full attention to this. So We will look at having another meeting in January.
Mhm.
I will get a draft to y'all with the edits that I've discussed to the permanent rules. I'll say at least a week before then. And whenever that ends up being set, if people want to send written comments within that period of time, I'll welcome that. If people want to send comments on the current draft, I mean, just feel free to send that. But like, I will be trying to make the changes that I've already mentioned. So that is, quantity and volume as opposed to monetary value. The change to estimated duration.
Just a clarification. I think I know the answer, but just to clarify, make sure we're all on the same page. The temporary rules will be official and effective January 1, correct?
Before then, the way that it works for Oregon is it is effective upon the date of filing. So
Okay.
It'll probably be like December 15th or so, something like that.
Okay.
Or I
That's
might
the hope.
delay it to give myself more time. Who knows?
Or it could be, yeah, it could be the 17th, it could be the 20th. We have a whole bunch of rules going in December. So
I will commit to mid to late December. That is what I will give you.
yeah. And then I will, as far as the rulemaking process, I will have dates for NUMI to go over for the permanent rulemaking. There's a couple of internal time periods that we have to that we abide by. So I know that June 15 sounds quite a ways out, but I don't know. I'm looking at probably March is wrapping it up for rulemaking on my behalf.
Yeah. Okay. Well, we will aim to make it happen before then. All right. Thank you, everybody, again for the robust discussion. We have, yeah.
I'm so sorry, Numi.
No worries.
If we're wrapping up, I just wanted to mention that we are very close to starting to accept this license type in NIPR. My plan is we are already drafting a website that will be a web page, part of our website that is dedicated to PSRs, that will house a document that gives you a tutorial along with a video of me showing you how to do it. And I will be holding probably once a week, basically Teams meetings like this to show people live how to do it and to answer any questions that you may have through the process. So I will be sending out an email, hopefully by the end of this week or early next week, with some dates and times to this group along with some other contacts, and feel free to forward that information to people who would find it useful.
Thanks, Eamon. That is useful, and glad to know we're doing that outreach. I have 7 minutes on the clock still. Is there anything else anyone would like to throw on before we shut things down? All right, hearing none, thanks for the discussion. I will give you 6 minutes of your lives back. And thanks, everybody. Hope to see you again in January, excuse me.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thanks.
Thank you, Karen.
All right, Karen, can we stop the recording?
Oh, thank you. I forgot to do that. Hold on.